Hi, I'm Margery Kempe, and I'm going to do a little bit of a reading today. First, I wanted to mention that I'm wearing my official Authors After Dark tiara because Authors After Dark treats us writers like we're queens, and we like that, of course. I'm going to read from Dragar Ella, which is the third fairy tale story that I've written for Noble Romance, and it will be coming out in March of 2011. In case somebody's seeing this 10 years from now. God, let's not think about that. All right, so I'm just going to jump in. That night the two of them joined the massive rumble of engines in the south end. Ella looked around her gaze as jumpy as the feeling in her heart. So many cars, and there were some real beauties. Just look at that powder blue T-bird. Jerry was less impressed. There's no way all this hot rodding is going to go on without somebody getting busted. I think half of Hartford's here. Let's get back to Hazardville before we're arrested. Not a chance, Jerry. I gotta let my cherry bomb show her stuff. Why do you care what this bunch of bozos thinks? Jerry sighed. Bunch of scrubs, she added as they rolled past a bunch of young guys with beer cans in their hands, yelling compliments in their general direction. It's not what they think. I just want to make my pop proud. Ella looked over at her friend. You might want to hop out now. This is the cue for the starters. Starters? Jerry squinted into the murk beyond the last set of streetlights. Just visible was a guy and a gal with big pirate flags on sticks. You can get anything at the party stores. But she opened the door and stepped out. Don't you go getting hurt. Ella nodded and smiled, but she knew how stiff the expression was. Her heart beat a tattoo against her rib cage. I'll be fine. I want to hear you cheering for me. Oh, you'll hear me, Jerry promised. I'll be yelling my head off. I'll be shouting, don't you go killing yourself, because I am not going to be the one to tell you're grand. Muttering, Jerry started walking down the finish line, where a thick crowd surged around a pair of barrels, painted neon yellow. Waiting for the line to shorten, Ella watched one pair of cars after another squeal off toward the finish line to the cheering crowds. Her stomach decided to climb up her esophagus toward her throat, just to be on the safe side. She swallowed, but she had no spit. Just ahead of her was a bright white Mustang, looked to be a '66. The guy driving it seemed to be listening to music, bobbing his head. Maybe that'll calm me. Ella started to hum Mustang Sally, which seemed to help some. With a start, she realized the Mustang and the green Camaro were at the start now. Before she knew it, they started off, the Mustang quickly pulling ahead. Ella glanced to her left. She hadn't even dared to look to see who her competition was. A black Trans Am revved beside her Ford, and she had to scold herself to keep from feeling a surge of contempt, just because I don't like them. Too late. Her stomach had dropped back down where it belonged, and Ella leaned forward to anticipate the starter's flag. The woman held the skull and crossbones aloft for what seemed an eternity, then dropped it. Her foot jammed on the gas, and almost immediately she shifted into second, keeping her hands firm on the wheel and her eyes fixed on those neon barrels. Ella slammed into third and felt her car dig into the road like a racing cheetah. Fourth gear, and they were past the finish line, and there were cheers and people jumping up and down, and there, Jerry, too. And Ella realized that she had no idea who won. Slowing down enough for Jerry to hop in, Ella pulled around to the pit area, where the competitors met after the races, those that didn't go off sulking. You did it! You did it! You did it! Jerry smothered her in a hug, shrieking in her ear. I won! Ella shook her head. The roar of the race still echoed inside her skull, or only was that the sound of the next pair taking off. By a good car length or more, girlfriend, Jerry laughed. Come on, you have to show off, and I need a beer. They sell beer? Ella asked, finally loosening her seatbelt and setting a shaky foot on the ground. Somebody's bound to give you one. You're Ace's girl. Jerry beamed. And you didn't want me to race. A hand tapped her on the arm. Good race. A rough-looking guy with an incongruous baby face stuck out his hand. He drove the Trans Am. Thanks. Ella figured she probably shouldn't say it was her first. This was my dad's car. She patted the cherry bomb's shining curves. It's a honey, the guy said, smiled briefly, and then walked away. You should have told him it was your first race ever, Jerry pouted. Ella laughed, but before she could answer, another voice broke in. Then you deserve this drink even more. Turning toward the offer, Ella saw a guy with the blackest hair she'd ever seen, its shine as glossy as the cherry bomb's finish. Thanks. Below the Elvis quiff were a pair of eyes as blue as a summer sky, not to mention a crooked smile that showed his amusement at her careful scrutiny. Ella's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but her gaze didn't drop before she noticed that he was well-built, broad in the chest, and dressed in a beaten leather jacket over a Witch's Dungeon t-shirt. Ella wished she wasn't wearing her most dilapidated pair of jeans and a paint-spattered hoodie. Oh, God, what does my hair look like? Thanks. She took the beer, her hand already clammy. He didn't seem to notice. I don't recall seeing you around here before. My name's J.D. He stuck his hand out toward Ella, but before she could find words to respond, Jerry stepped in. I don't know if my friend really needs to get to know some random unemployed street dragger. Jerry gave him the hairy eyeball. Ella didn't know whether to punch her then or wait until they got back to the car. Who's unemployed? His raised eyebrows telegraphed surprise, but the crooked smile was still in place. I'm the chief mechanic at the Backstreet's garage in Rockville. You can ask Henry. He owns the place. Jerry folded her arms. Yeah, well, we can check on that. J.D. looked down at Jerry with evident amusement. I might have a check stub in my pocket. Jerry, Ella said, grabbing her friend's arm, knock it off. For your own good. Jerry regarded J.D. as if he were some kind of unknown but poisonous snake. We don't know what he's after. How about some history on your car? She's beauty. Ella grinned, though Jerry continued to glower. It was my dad's. A 49? J.D. stepped around the car in the opposite direction, away from the two of them, his attention glued to the cherry bomb's glossy paint job, which looked almost like blood in the streetlights. My uncle had one like this when I was a kid, but he sold it before I was old enough to drive. My dad chopped the top and dropped it, but he only started on rebuilding the engine when he died. Ella's eyes glazed over for a minute, thinking of the long, rainy afternoons, watching her dad weld the roof onto the body. Patience, little girl, that's the ticket, he'd say, and ruffle her curls. Ella loved watching his careful concentration as he worked his way around the car, the smell of the molten wire and the tense strength in his arms. Sorry about your dad, J.D. said, his voice quiet. My mom died when I was 10. My dad died 2 years ago, Ella said, over at the young man who was running a hand across the curve of the C-pillar, examining the joining. He nodded his head as if approving the bodywork. It doesn't ever stop hurting, but you get used to the pain. I suppose, Ella said, running her own hand across the cherry bomb's hood. The surface retained the engine's warmth. Jerry looked at her with something approaching suspicion and shook her head. Did it take a lot of Bondo to smooth out the joinings? J.D. had walked back around the car to stand next to Ella. You can't even see a line. A lot of sanding, Ella said. She could smell the leather of his jacket and the lingering scent of some kind of aftershave. His hands were nice, big, strong, the nails rough, but clean. He choked on the dust even with masks. Girl, we gotta go. Jerry's voice sounded firm. Her arms were still crossed. It's not that late, Ella said, but her watch said differently. You coming back next weekend? J.D. managed a nonchalant tone. You want to go against me? Ella said, her voice huskier than she'd intended. J.D. looked right at her and smiled. Ella's knees filled with sand. You know I do. We gotta go, Jerry repeated, getting in the car and snapping her seatbelt on. I gotta go, Ella repeated, her cheeks warming under his steady gaze. A kiss for the winner, J.D. said, diving in to press his lips to hers. Ella hesitated for a fraction of a second, then gave back as good as she got, meeting his lips with eagerness, darting her tongue into his mouth. Something electric bloomed between them. Ella's nipples popped out like her tongue, brushing against his chest. A violent urge to be crushed against that broad expanse filled her as the kiss continued. His tongue slipped around hers, probing deeper. Just when the dizziness threatened to overcome her, the horn blared and the two of them jumped like they'd been shocked. We have to go, Jerry hissed. J.D. grinned that lopsided smile. Next week? You bet, Ella grinned right back at him, hoping she didn't look like an idiot with that smile plastered across her face. She got in the car and started it up. J.D. waved as she pulled out through the thinning crowds and rolling cars. My thighs are on fire. Jerry snorted. I could tell. Then why'd you make us run off like that? Ella glowered at her best friend. I could use a few more hours of that kissing. Whoa, baby. Jerry looked at her open-mouthed. Do you know anything about that boy? He could be a serial killer or unemployed. Ella laughed. You're crazy, you know that? He said, Jerry mimicked. We check him out and then we see about what he said to you, girl. You're like a babe in the woods. I never understood that phrase, Ella said as she merged onto 91 North. What are those babes doing in the woods anyway? I think that's a good place to stop. So thanks. Hope you like it.